Um, so with this one, it really took me a while to think about it. And one of the things that I've realized in the last couple of years, getting to know so many incredible artists that maybe at one point I looked up to, and now I can happily call them my friends, is that some of the best artists in this space, our conversations are not about technique. Our conversations are about the mentality and the philosophy behind the work. And I feel like that's really once you get beyond how to use an interface, what's left? And I think that's what's the meat of this is how to be inspired, how to pull from your own influences, how to be unique as an artist, how to create things that are important or fulfilling to you. When hopefully people who listen to this will have that point in their career where they get to choose between what films or what games they work on. That's an amazing milestone when you have a bunch of offers in front of you and they're all cool projects. That's when the advanced matte painting kicks in of what's going to fulfill you, what's going to get you excited, what are you going to be able to bring to a project that is uniquely yours, so that you're not just filling a seat, but you're there because of the work you create, you specifically create.
Today's guest is the mighty Maxx Burman. Maxx is a highly accomplished creative professional who is as productive and as driven as they come. From co-founding the industry standard Kitbash 3D, art directing, and his extensive matte painting career, Maxx is also back teaching his second Learn Squared course, Advanced Matte Painting. In this episode, we learn about Maxx's intentions behind the course and how it can benefit matte painters and artists alike, as well as offering a deeper insight into his career, journey, and what makes him such a formidable professional. I even have my own fanboy moment in this episode as I share with Maxx how he has impacted my own creative journey. Buckle up and let's go. Okay, cool. Yeah, let's begin. Everyone, welcome to the Learn Squared podcast, and today's guest is the amazing Maxx Burman. Hey, Maxx.
Hey, what's up, Aaron?
How's it going? It's been a while since you've been in official Learn Squared colors.
Yeah, it's long overdue.
Yeah,
but
actually,
I'm excited for it.
We can get to that in a little bit, because although that could easily be a throwaway comment, there's obviously a lot more to that. And although this will probably be released around the course launch anyway, if anyone isn't aware, Maxx is back and he has another Learn Squared course. Following on from his amazing first course, Intro to Matte Painting, he now has Advanced Matte Painting. Now, as someone who is not a matte painter, when because I've watched both courses now, and I watched the second course quite recently, and for me, I was looking at it more like as a different discipline, so like a different skill set and what have you. But I was quite taken aback in a positive way about how you firstly approached that particular piece you made in that course, and the amount of, I guess, how I would describe it is philosophy and personal journey, and even like just put a lot of yourself that goes into, in particular, that painting, but even your process in general. So that really straight away was like a big draw for me, just to even see how you develop that into I guess, like a technical piece, in a finished piece. But before we get to that, if anyone isn't aware of yourself, if you want to give them a quick lowdown of who Maxx Burman is, because although I could list it, there's clearly like about 100 different titles you could be given because you do so much. But I think that's probably best coming from yourself.
Well, I'm glad you like the course, so I'm excited to hear what you think about it. Yeah, I have a hard time describing what I do. I, I think no matter what I do, I think I identify as an artist first and foremost, uh,
Mm,
and I kind of defined myself by my career as a matte painter.
mhm,
Um, I spent 12 years as a matte painter in the film and games industry. Uh, since then, I've kind of broken off and done a lot of different things. I've started two companies. I
mm,
made a video game and released that with Nintendo. I've been an executive producer on things. Most of my time these days is spent running Kipesh 3D.
mhm,
But for some reason, I still think of myself as a matte painter.
mm,
And so, I've never given that up. That's still a passion of mine, and maybe I only do a couple paintings a year these days, but
mhm.
it's something that's so deeply rooted in me that I just want to keep that part of me going.
Sick. And like, when did you become a matte painter? Like, say officially, was that like with your first gig, or was that something? I guess that's a different way to define, right? Because you could easily say some people might define it as when you got paid for a job as a matte painter, right? And then another answer could be the moment you realize that you wanted to be one. Were they both the same, or did they come at different times?
Uh, yeah, it's a really good question. I feel like it touches so much on um, this kind of when you're first getting started, how you present yourself.
Mm,
Because there's a big difference when someone says, "I want to be a matte painter" versus "I am a matte painter."
mhm,
Uh, and I think the moment you declare yourself, whatever you're trying to aspire to, there's a mentality shift.
mm,
And sometimes you make that declaration a little early and it takes a while to fit into that skin. But I think, for me, I declared it as soon as I think I was in high school and I was like, this is what I want to do. And as soon as I got out, I just started saying, I'm a matte painter. I'm doing paintings every day. I might
mm.
not be getting paid for them, but I'm doing matte paintings every day. That's what I do. And then a couple months later, actually started getting paid to be a matte
Sick.
painter. And then that skin felt a little more comfortable.
And um, like, what really triggered you to become one? Like, was it a film, a moment, even an artist in particular?
Yeah, I mean, seeing movies like The Matrix is such a moment of my life of seeing those big environments, being
Mm.
like, whoever makes that, I want to make that. Uh, and I remember going to a Gnomon Live workshop,
Yeah.
and and Dylan Cole was up on stage showing the matte paintings he had been doing, and I thought, oh, that's what they call it.
Yes.
And as soon as I found out that's what they call it, um, I was like, that okay, now I know what I want to do. I have a name for it.
Mm. And was there, I guess, no looking back at ever since?
Uh, I mean,
In a
I
nutshell, I
went
guess.
straight into it.
Yeah.
I'll say that 12 years later, there's a little looking back and saying,
Okay.
yeah, maybe I'm ready to do something else.
um. So what's quite interesting is that when you pick up a particular skill or even want to nurture one and develop one, because one thing about this profession, and I say profession loosely because there's so many titles and so many labels, right? But the journey is kind of the same no matter which way you approach it. And although you're at a certain level in, like I said, when you first started out, you're getting paid for it. There's always still that learning path, and the learning never stops. Um, how was that for you? Was that something that was quite come naturally to you, like to learn and develop your skills? Was that something that you kind of had to force yourself to um, really adopt and help yourself to grow?
I mean, yeah, that's a good question. That was never really a thought in my head of
Hmm.
having to force myself to learn. I think I always had like an extreme drive and
Mm,
ambition to be the best at my craft,
nice.
um, and that just never really faltered. Like there were many times where I'd burn out and I'd recover for a little bit and then I'd dive back into it. But I
Yeah.
went at it with full force, taking
Hmm.
two or three jobs at a time, constantly learning, constantly pushing myself for the better part of a decade.
Mm. And you mentioned a little bit about burnout. That's something personally that I have been battling for the last, I'd say, well, I guess for a long time maybe, but um, recovery times have been quicker in the past compared to now. Um, like, how did you cope with that?
I mean, not well. I'll say that. Uh, yeah, burnout is such a serious thing in our industry, and it's a shame that it's become an accepted part of doing this for a
Yes.
living.
Yes.
Um, I'll say that I burned out one too many times to the point where I didn't want to do it anymore
Mm.
and stopped being a full-time map painter. And I think that's the danger of burnout. You burn out too many times, and the magic gets lost, and then you have to go find something else to do.
So, because you mentioned that in the intro to your current course, is that because you had basically a sabbatical, right? And the last time we met in industry workshops, that was kind of during your, I guess, well, we can call it art sabbatical, right? Because you have been very busy in that time. It wasn't a case of you were completely idle. Um, was that literally what brought it on? Just about a burnout,
Yeah, it was a couple things. I had been burnt out the year before doing a lot of projects, and I
right?
never really recovered. And I joined a studio, and basically, I realized that I wasn't feeling fulfilled in this job anymore. And so I think it's a little different than burnout. It wasn't that I've been working so hard
Mm.
that I can't stand to work anymore. It was
Hmm.
more like there's just not a lot of fulfillment here anymore.
Mm.
And I had tried every position. I had had just about every job you could have,
Hmm.
and none of them felt right for me. And so I realized I needed to take a step back and um, figure a different course because I felt like I was at the end of the road
Mm.
with that career.
And those different roles you took, was that something that was just like a nature of the job at hand? It just required you'd perhaps maybe wear different hats, or was that a conscious decision for you to try something different just to kind of, I guess, keep that spark alive, perhaps?
I think the different jobs were all in the with the goal of having the biggest impact or contribution to a project.
Mm.
And so, when you start out and you're, a freelance artist, you see that, hey, staff artists, they're on the project longer and maybe they get, more time with it so they can have a larger impact on it.
Mm.
And maybe you become a staff artist, you go, well, the lead gets to
Mhm.
make a lot of the calls here. And you kind of keep seeing up the ladder of like, well, the art director gets to set the direction of this thing.
Mm.
Or the studio owner gets to choose the art director. So it was kind of always like, how do I have the largest impact on the project, which kind of led me to these other roles until ultimately, being a VFX studio owner or an
Mhm.
art director at a large studio, I realized that there's a whole other industry that's controlling this, and it's the business side. It's whoever owns the brand is really the client for the studio,
Mm.
and they're the ones who make the ultimate decision, um, which made me realize that there was only so much creative room that I would have working at a vendor,
Mhm.
for clients.
And when you came to that conclusion, um, firstly, how did it make you feel as a creative? Did it kind of demotivate you a little bit? Did it trigger? And I guess looking fast forward to what you've done today, perhaps that kind of answers it. But it triggers something else in you. But like, what was going through your mind at the time?
Yeah, I was definitely lost at the time, and I'll caveat this whole journey with this was my journey, and I don't necessarily think anyone else needs to be on that path. Um, I think in a different world, I would have been more focused on the quality of my craft and having gotten less distracted by the projects themselves or the studios themselves. So
Mm.
I don't think that this is necessarily the path for everyone.
Mhm.
Uh, But I will say, when I hit the end of the path, it was really terrifying. It was disheartening.
Mm.
I had spent a decade going down this road and realizing I had hit a dead end, and I had no clue where to go next and what to do, um,
Wow.
and really had to reinvent myself and find a new career and a new skill set.
And looking back now, at that moment, is that something that you perhaps, for lack of a better phrase, more are grateful for that moment, thankful for that moment, or and that's more like considering how things have played out now, or do you still wish, or perhaps hope that that had never happened?
I wouldn't have done anything differently. Yeah,
Yeah.
when I look at, I'm a very blessed person. I have an amazing life, and I'm
Mm.
so grateful for it that I wouldn't want to change anything in the past that might disrupt where I am today and what I get to do every day.
That's great to hear, and that's a good point, in fact, because um, perhaps as creatives, especially with the journey that we all embark on, and a lot of it is, I mean, the act in the purity of it, the act of creating is amazing. It's one of the best feelings. That's why I guess we all do it. But then when you're trying to create that to like making a career and then earning money and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of anxiety that can come with it. There's a lot of pitfalls that come along the way, and things can really, in some cases, maybe break people, or in some cases, make people. Um, but it's like when you really take a distance and look back, it is quite important to appreciate, I guess, everything. Because, like you just mentioned, if you wouldn't change anything, that means that shows that everything that happened has taken you on that path that you are right now, right?
Yeah, it's really hard to see it in the moment sometimes as
Mm.
artists when we hit those crossroads. And usually those big changes in life are the most terrifying, but the things that we look back on with the most gratitude.
Mm. And like coming to the course a little bit, um, and that's what I mentioned earlier when I was like a bit taken aback in terms of what your approach was, because like, again, this is coming from a non-map payer. I anticipated more like this is the project and this is what we'd build. But again, you mentioned a lot of your journey, your personality, and in terms of what you experienced, because you mentioned about your sabbatical, you mentioned about a bit about the burnout and things like that as well, and also the fact that in terms of how things are for you now, um, personal work was something that came by, like you mentioned today, a couple of times a year. How does that feel? Like not being able to create as much personal art as perhaps it used to before.
Yeah, I think I'd frame it a little differently.
Okay.
I think it's less that it's not so much that I don't create as much. It's more that I get to spend more time on the things that I create.
Ah.
Um, I get to do it at my own pace.
Mm.
I don't need to be painting every single day anymore.
Yes.
It's I paint when it's fun for me,
Mm.
and that's just a very different relationship with it, which ends up resulting in less paintings each year. But also, I put out work and do paintings that I'm really proud of that I get to spend a lot of time doing. I don't really have a lot of filler work that I'm creating
Mm.
these days.
Nice. Actually, that's actually a really good point, because when you think about it, productivity doesn't necessarily need to be a bunch of work, and like you nailed it, a lot of it's filler work, right? Um, so how has it been being able to? I mean, compared to how you create now, with being able to take as much time as you want, versus, I guess, how it was before with having to do a lot. Um, would you like to go back to that previous way of having to do a lot, or do you like it as it is now?
I like it as it is now. I mean, in my job at Kid Bash, I do a lot every day, and we race. We move really fast. We have a lot of things
Mm.
going at once with a lot of people working on a lot of projects. So that's kind of where my, I guess, grind gets fulfilled. And I can use art now as when I'm inspired to make something and I want to take my time, or I want to learn a new thing and try something out. Yeah, it's different not being a, honestly, it's weird to say, but like I'm not really a professional artist anymore.
Uh-huh.
It's my hobby again, which it's an amazing thing to get to go back to having it as a hobby.
Mm. So when you made your first course versus when you made this your second course, how was your mindset back then, and how was your more in terms of your approach and where you were at in terms of your career back then versus now?
Yeah, back when I made the intro course, I
Yeah,
was map painting every day. I was
yeah,
working on projects every day. Um, the first course was really a technical course of breaking down all of the tools of Photoshop for someone who maybe had never done map painting before, and hopefully giving a really step-by-step guide and a really cohesive look at all of the tools at your disposal for a 2D map painting workflow.
mm,
Uh, with this course, it's, I mean, it took me a while. I've been getting asked to do an advanced course for a while, and
mm,
I just didn't really know what advanced would mean. It took me a while to be like, okay, if I'm going to do an advanced course, I say it in the course too, of like, does that just mean using more complex softwares?
mm,
Uh, does that mean, doing way more ambitious 2D work? Does it mean using a 3D workflow? What does any of that have to do with being an advanced map painter?
mm.
Um, Especially today, in 4 years, things have changed where almost everyone's using 3D,
Yeah.
and we could do an intro course in 3D. I mean, Steve did an amazing course. Steve Gorman did an amazing course
Shout out to Steve.
that breaks down the intros to 3D map painting. So
Mm,
he kind of already covered that. So with this one, it really took me a while to think about it. And one of the things that I've realized in the last couple of years, getting to know so many incredible artists that maybe at one point I looked up to, and now I can happily call them my friends,
mm,
is that some of the best artists in this space, our conversations are not about technique.
mm,
Our conversations are about the mentality and the philosophy
mm,
behind the work. And I feel like that's really once you get beyond how to use an interface, what's left? And I think that's what's the meat of this is um, how to be inspired, how to pull from your own influences, how to be unique as an artist, how to create things that are important or fulfilling to you. When hopefully people who listen to this will have that point in their career where they get to choose between what films or what games they work on.
mhm,
uh, that's an amazing milestone when you have a bunch of offers in front of you and they're all cool projects. That's when the advanced map painting kicks in of what's going to fulfill you, what's going to
mm.
get you excited, what are you going to be able to bring to a project that is uniquely yours, so that you're not just filling a seat, but you're there because of the work you specifically create.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's incredible, and that's straight away. Um, when I was watching the course, that's the first thing I picked up. I was like, wow, this is really hitting those kind of questions and thoughts that like, although I'm nowhere near as experienced as yourself or a lot of other artists out there, but nevertheless, it was still thinking of what is like I guess what is advanced, because on one hand, and you teach it in the course, which is a technical aspect of it, right? But then there's even that mental side, which is, like you just said, I think perhaps something advanced is being able to choose what you work on, choose what fulfills you, as opposed to and you mentioned this in the course as well about your own journey, where it was, I think you used the phrase just to fill a seat, right? Like if you're gonna get hired just to fill a seat versus are you gonna get hired to, like for who you are, for what you have that no one else can give you. Um how did you how when did you come to that realization that that was either happening to you at that point, or is that something that could have happened to you at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it happened slowly, where I realized more and more that like there was a it started to happen where, some jobs I'd get because they needed a map painter, and
Uh,
some jobs I'd get because they wanted me. And it kind of happened over a long period of time where it slowly phased out of, oh, they're just calling me because I'm on their roster of map painters, and started more and more like, hey, this art director requested you, or this director requested you. Um, and I think that was kind of a slow transition because I wasn't really aware of what was going on.
mm,
And I talk about it in the course a little bit of like, I didn't showcase anything that was uniquely mine. I was
mm,
trying to be so adaptable to every and any client. Like, I think it's kind of hilarious that in a row I did Hotel Transylvania,
mhm,
Dark Souls, and Iron Man in a row.
mm,
And those or those projects could not be more different. And then you look at the portfolio, and there's no sense of who I am or what my artistic sensibilities are.
mm.
Uh,
I, so
Great
please,
projects,
yeah.
but it just doesn't say anything about the artists. And those are the types of moves that I made that made it so that I was filling matte painting seats.
And fast forward to today in terms of how the industry is, and again, you mentioned this in the course and you mentioned it in the podcast as well so far, is that things have changed since the first course in terms of just software and adaptation of software. And you also make a point as well to people that although you have certain tools that you use in the course, it's okay and not a problem at all to substitute for whatever anyone's comfortable with. But you also make a point for people to also keep an ear out for the changes that will happen, because the last few years software has changed incredibly, and the learning curve, I guess, in terms of getting used to a software is not as steep as it used to be. Um, but then in that case, because one thing that I would perhaps mention is, and I'm sure maybe other artists might think that, is wherever they are in their particular career at that point, they would maybe happily take like like any job. Like they would say, if that's what it requires to get work, where my work doesn't really show in terms of as a collection of work, like my identity. Um, but that's okay because I'm getting work and getting gigs, what have you. Like, what would you say to that person, or maybe to that mindset?
I think it's necessary in the beginning. I
Mm,
think when you're starting out, the goal is to sustain as an artist.
mm,
Uh, I think it's really important. And in the beginning of your career, you have to be adaptable, and you might not know what your style actually is.
mm,
Uh, I think a lot of artists struggle to like figure out what is their look, what is their style, and I don't think it's necessarily productive at the beginning of your career.
mm,
I think as you keep going in your career, and I think this is why this is really for advanced map painting,
mm,
is as you keep going in your career, um, it's something you have to develop, and it's something that I don't think is really taught often of how to develop that,
mm,
which is one of the reasons why I thought this course was important to make, is because it's a resource that I think should exist.
mm.
It's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I didn't do another map painting course after intro to map painting for
Mhm.
4 years, is because I thought I covered it. Like, I spent a long time trying to be as thorough as possible to
Yes.
give every knowledge in map painting for Photoshop at least. And then, teaching specific softwares I thought was, I mean, that's a short-lived thing.
Mm,
Um, Softwares change so often. It's I think it's almost more important to just learn how to learn 3D softwares quickly.
mm,
Um, which is why, in this course, I'll show you the buttons I click, and I'll go through my process, but I want to caveat it constantly with, this is just the tool I'm using today. Next year might be a completely different tool. So
mm.
if you're taking this course to learn Maya, it's probably not the course for you. And I don't even know if you should be learning Maya right now.
Mhm.
Um, but if you want to see the process, because the process will be close to the same. It'll evolve, but at least that can be a through line, regardless of what software you're using.
Mm. And just a quick one on this. Where do you see software heading? Like, let's fast forward to 4 years from now or a couple of years from now. Like, where do you think it would be then?
Man, it's so hard to say that.
Mm,
At Kipesh, we have a channel where everyone posts the any changes happening with any softwares
right.
that anyone sees. Whoever's the first one to see it, post it on there because Kipesh kind of has to adapt to all of that stuff
Yeah.
constantly. And that channel has new things on it all day, every day. Just constant change here. Um, I just don't. I think at the rate of change, it's hard to predict, which is why we have to be adaptable in our
Yes.
software. But I think one common thing that we can rely on is that software is going to get easier.
And about adaptability, um, like one element is that is that whatever's changing or whatever you need to adapt to, if that's gets easier like software, then at least on one hand, it makes it easier to adapt in terms of getting used to a certain software or workflow or even a pipeline. Um, can adaptability be taught, in your opinion?
I think a lot of times it's really hard to stay adaptable. When you've
Mm,
been doing something for a few years, you start to get in your rhythm and you kind of don't want to change.
mhm,
It's easy to become stubborn uh, until you can't not adapt anymore.
mm,
Uh, I remember being at studios using CS5 Photoshop or whatever it was at the time, and seeing other people with their interface just like looked so 90s, and they were like, "Yeah, I won't upgrade from Photoshop 1998 because I'm just used to it." And it was just like, what are you doing here? Like that's not sustainable. Like how many studios are you going to go to that are going to be able to even fulfill the request of can you install that Photoshop version here? Um, and you just don't want to fall into that trap. It doesn't
mm,
mean that you have to always grab the newest software the day it comes out.
yeah.
But it does mean you have to pay attention to when a better tool is out there and the industry is moving.
Is
Uh,
that
you know,
something that you've experienced on your end?
Well, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm still using Maya when most of everyone I know has switched to Blender.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Blender has great tools in it. Maya hasn't gone away. It's still the standard inside of visual effects
Mm,
studios, which is why I still use it, is because it's still, I'm comfortable with it. If I do work for a studio, it makes it easy, but I
mm,
see Blender being an amazing tool, and I'm just not at a point where I'm ready to switch yet.
mm. I'm in a similar place. I My first 3D package was Maya in terms of like learning it. So it's more a familiarity thing. Um, and although Blender is awesome and I have used it on projects, it's just like it's just like I look at it as moving house, but like super super slowly, like $1 a month, and then eventually I end up over there. But then if the job's still getting done on that particular software, and like you mentioned, Maya still used heavily within the industry. Um, then I guess it's not too bad. Perhaps even when Blender or if another competitor comes out of the blue, does take over as a standard, I guess the fundamentals of what you do in that package probably won't change, right?
Yeah, I think learning how to use one package is only going to help you for the next package.
Mm,
Um, Understanding how materials work in Maya means that when you switch to Blender and you're reassigning materials or changing a diffuse map or whatever it is,
mm.
you know what it is. You just need to find where the buttons are.
Um, so like with actually one of my favorite lessons in the course is lesson one, um, which is the chapter is basically called "The Spark of an Idea." Um, and one of the reasons why I like it is how you describe how you basically come up with the painting, right? And as a concept artist, like it's for me at least anyway, it's all about ideation. So it's coming up with ideas, looking at references, and just trying to turn them into something. But the way you do it is like, in my opinion, so cool because the way you describe how 'Cause I believe for the image that you created for the course, um, your inspiration was from a place where you visited. Was it Venice? Did I get that right, or was it somewhere else?
For the painting of the course, it was Angkor Wat
Oh,
in
sorry, yeah,
Cambodia.
completely different continent. So yeah, but you described something about how like you remember the sound of things, like the details of how you were there, how the ground felt, all that kind of stuff. It's like for me, that's quite fascinating and eye opening of how much attention you pay to the environment you're in. Um, would you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think concept art and matte painting have a lot of similarities.
Mm,
I think one of the big differences is the amount of time that goes into it. Uh, with concept art, so much of it is about generating ideas so quickly. With matte painting, um, the idea comes once, and then you have a couple hundred hours to spend
mm,
executing on it. So it almost means that the idea is even more important with the matte painting because you only get one before you put all that execution into it.
mm,
With concept art, it's almost like you're iterating on ideas.
mm,
Uh, so I think with matte painting, it means that the idea is that much more important because you got one and you're going to spend a lot of time executing on it. And so I think it's worth an entire lesson
mm,
to really focus on how to do that. Uh, for me in my paintings, my goal is always to give that sense of awe. It's kind of been my goal even when I'm working on client projects on
mm,
films and games. Usually I'm painting an establishing shot, and the purpose of the establishing shot is to uh, give a breath to the film, like give a moment of breathing room
mm,
to hit an emotion hard that is showing the emotion of the character who's going to inhabit that world. And hopefully to give that sense of awe of like, look at this space that they're in.
mm.
And so if that's my goal, I have to think about, well, when are the moments that I have that feeling? Uh, Usually in real life of really tuning into that of if I'm in an amazing place, and it doesn't have to be something as crazy as like a temple in Angkor Wat.
Mm.
It can be as simple as walking down your street and the clouds are just epic on that day, and
Mhm.
you just take a moment to be like, man, what is this feeling right here, and tune into it, and then tune into the environment around it and why you're getting that feeling, and try to capture that and put it in the hopper for when you need to call on it for a painting.
And when you come to process that, because that's like I guess the ultimate reference, right? It's as you'll agree, there's only so much when an image cannot capture a particular moment, or even like say a beautiful place, the picture does not really show as it was when you're actually there in real life. Um, so that is like that's like the perfect reference because it's almost like you're bringing that moment, that place into your work. How do you absorb and remember that detail? Like, do you have a particular process for that? Is that just purely feeding into however it sits in your mind and how it makes you, like you mentioned about the emotions and all that kind of stuff? Like, you just normally tapping into that, or do you have something more perhaps strategic in terms of how to extract that information or that inspiration from that moment?
Yeah, I think I, don't- I wish I had a better way to describe this, but I think there's those moments when you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. I want to take a picture of it so I could remember it.
Mm,
And then there's those moments where you're like, this is so amazing that I don't want to pull my phone out.
mhm,
I just want to be present with it. Uh, and I think those are the good ones. Those are
mm,
the best ones. Is when you don't want to take a picture because you don't want to look away and you just want to be present with it. Uh, so I think I wish I had a better way to describe it, but I feel like that's um, the goal there is just to be present with it, to
mm,
pay attention to it, to ask yourself questions of like, what am I feeling? I mean, and I'm not talking about emotionally. I'm talking
Sure.
about physically. What am I
Yes.
feeling? Am I feeling a breeze? What's the temperature outside? What's this smell like?
Yes. Yes.
What's
Yes.
all of the senses, and trying to tune in and kind of run through the senses in your head of like, because when you're bringing that into a painting, what you want to do is, how do I use one sense to capture all of the others?
Mm.
And I think, as reference, when you're doing a painting, you can look at your painting and go, no, it was warmer there. It
Mm.
needs to feel that warmth of it, or the air was still. And so, like, how do I get that into the painting?
And is traveling something that I guess you do, or when you're allowed to? Is that something you do quite often when possible?
Yeah, despite this year, yeah, traveling is one of my favorite things in the world. And prior to the pandemic, it was a couple months of my year was spent traveling. Uh,
Nice.
Usually try to see some new places and just explore and wander, but also, the art community has such amazing festivals, especially in
Yes.
Europe. And so going over there and getting to meet people like you in
Yes.
London, and all the amazing artists at those events. That's one of my favorite things to do in the world.
Yeah, that's one thing. Although I'm not well traveled in terms of like going places, not being able to meet people during the various festivals that happened normally has been quite a tough pill to swallow, because they're awesome, as you'll agree, and it's always that's well, there's a lot of downsides to what's been happening, but for me personally, and I'm sure you'd agree, that's been one of the biggest ones as well.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's a stark contrast. I think it was like 2 years ago. Two of my closest friends are on the other side of the world, and Steve Corman and Sava
Yeah,
Živkovic.
yeah.
And it's funny that I would consider them closest friends, but I think it's just because we connect on such an amazing level.
Mm.
And we had probably 2 years where we were constantly on the road together. Of not purposely, we would just end up in the same cities, in the same countries. And at one point, I remember we were in a cab, and Sala just goes, "I think I see you guys more than I see anyone in my country." And that's something that I miss a lot. Is just those types of connections and friendships, and getting to go explore new places with amazing people.
Hopefully, it will happen again soon. Hopefully.
Yeah.
So like moving on to the second lesson, which is world building. This is probably my favorite. In fact, when I was looking at the course, like basically, first lesson is idea generation, second lesson is world building, and then the final two lessons are more like bringing it all together into a proper finished piece. In terms of me, like, how I make environments, as I see lesson four is in like that is beast mode level in terms of that's how it should be finished. In terms of my
Mhm.
journey, I feel like I'm currently stuck on like lesson two. One of the reasons probably is because I just find it fun, like just experimenting, putting things together, and just seeing, like how these different experiments can turn into potentially awesome things. Um, and one of those reasons why is 'cause I tend to use a lot of 3D for that. And obviously this course is very 3D heavy. And you do use as I believe, obviously you got Maya, which is I guess like the workbench where everything is assembled together. You also use Gaia and a few other assets, and one of them being one of my personal favorites, Kitbash 3D. Um one of those reasons is, and I definitely want to make a point of that later on in the podcast as to why, because it's affected me personally. But in terms of like, say, just I guess as a strategic and technical standpoint and viewpoint from an artist, is the way you can use a particular kit, come up with any particular result that you either want to go for or even didn't know you wanted to go for, and then just bring it to life in different ways. Um, but how do you like? How does a world building process work for you?
Yeah, I think, coming off of lesson one, which is all about the idea. Once you have the idea, it's kind of this fine line between execution and serendipity.
Mm.
You want to race towards a direction. You want to have a clear direction to move towards, but you also want to leave room for um, the little accidents that happen along the way.
Mm.
And 3D is such a cool place for that because you really can have accidents. In 2D painting, you really are executing almost. You know, you can't change the camera.
Mhm.
Shifting structure is going to change the perspective, so you have to be a lot more deliberate with all of that. In 3D, you can say, you know what, let me try to move the sun over here,
Yeah.
or let me just see what happens if I put these shapes together. I don't know if that answered your question at all.
No, yes, yes, it did. It did. I think my mic just cut out. Um, and like in terms of workflow now, when you made the first course, were you using much 3D then?
Oh, man, you know, I wasn't because I didn't want to do all the modeling and UVing and
Mm.
texturing. Um, you know, I'd use it when I had to use it, and you know, I wanted to use it more. I just didn't want to do all the legwork of prepping assets, which is one of the reasons why we started Kitbash.
Mhm.
Uh, and once I had Kitbash assets, and you know, this is going to sound like a sales pitch, but it's not. It's once I had those, I started having a lot more fun in 3D.
Yeah.
Um, and honestly, when we started the company, part of it was like, you know, even if no one ever picks up any of these kits, at least I'll have tools to play with, and I'm going to enjoy them and use them. So, um, you know,
I, I
luckily other people pick them too.
I can vouch for that because since I've used them, to be honest with you, I think in my quote unquote artist journey, I didn't do any or attempt to do any environments professionally until I really started messing around with Kitbash 3D. So it really opened up, like in terms of creative doors, a lot of different avenues where I perhaps was intimidated to explore because same things that you said is like I gotta build this, I gotta create this before I can even begin to play. So you just kind of like maybe not do that. So with Kitbash and just playing with assets in general, that really opened a lot of doors for me in that regard. So unlimited gratitude for that.
Oh, amazing! I'm thrilled to hear that.
And like, so what, once you, how long does the 3D element, or I guess the world building element, take? Does I'm sure, I'm assuming it can vary from piece to piece, but do you tend to limit how long you spend in that space because it can be quite, I guess, seductive, right? Because you can spend a lot of time just experimenting and playing.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of always that fine line. You know, when in my personal pieces, I'm okay to just play there for a while.
Mm.
Uh, and so I like taking my time there. You know, I still have done a couple um, client jobs since we started Kitbash, and I use Kitbash for them.
Hmm.
And when I'm doing that, I try to get basically the 3D is my concept. It's my halfway point, and so I
Mm.
try to do you know a day or two in 3D, send like a couple camera angles the first day, second day, just clean it up a little bit with
Mm.
some lighting, and then third, fourth, fifth day, I'm painting and adjusting and hitting notes and stuff like that. So you know, it's usually when I'm doing client work, it's a 1 week turnaround for a painting, and 2 days of that are in 3D.
Wow. Um, and going forward, I guess, um, but I guess you kind of answered this already anyway because of the freedom it gives you and just the way the industry's heading. But do you see yourself ever moving away from 3D now and going back to the old school way?
No way. Yeah, no way. It's
Straight that way.
just it's so hard for me to sit down and do a 2D piece anymore just because 3D, I mean, it's way more fun for me, I think. I think it's
Yeah.
just a way more fun way to create. I think it has so much more room for creativity also without, you know, honestly, it's less technical in my mind than
Mm.
2D because you don't
Interesting.
have to think about calculating light and shadows in a 2D
Okay.
world. You
Yeah.
don't think about perspective or, um, you know, lenses and trying to paint that in 2D. Um,
Oh.
So while there's kind of this initial learning curve of 3D, I think once you get over that hump, it becomes way less technical than 2D.
Mm. And in terms of like just how long it would take to create a painting. So to the painting you've created for this course, to do that in 2D, what is the time difference you're looking at in terms of your workflow?
Hmm. It's hard to even say that, but
Right.
I can tell you I'd be masking out palm trees for many, many hours, and that just doesn't sound fun to me.
I think yeah, that's a good
I'd be
point actually. Yeah. Like, and I guess before in terms of having to do that particular thing, do you think it would maybe put off? And I'm not saying from your perspective, but generally speaking, do you think it maybe put off great paintings happening when you have to do a lot of those mundane tasks, versus when you don't have to now?
Yeah, it's funny when I think about when I was doing 2D map paintings only, and I used to joke that like painting is only 10% of my job, masking things out is 90% of it. Um, and that's a tough thing to get over. There's the big hunt for reference images in 2D, and sometimes that takes a really long time to find the right image. But
Mm.
it's kind of you get a little dopamine hit. It's almost like a lottery when you find the
Oh
perfect
yes.
image. So there's that which kind of keeps you going, and then there's the masking, which is kind of like turn your brain off for a little bit. It's almost meditative,
Yeah, yeah.
um, and assembling everything. I guess when I think about this, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't go back to it. And actually, now thinking about it, I've done a couple of client jobs in the last 2 years that
Mhm.
I had to use 2D map painting techniques.
Mm.
Um, so I think there actually is a place for both of it,
Mm.
both techniques. I don't think 3D makes 2D obsolete.
Right,
Um,
right,
the more and more I'm thinking about this, the more and more I'm thinking of all of the client paintings that actually have come up where 3D wasn't an option.
right. Okay.
Um, so I think it's the right tool for the job.
Mm. Yes, that's the best way to put it. Um, and like when moving to like lesson 3 and 4, um, like lesson 3 is basically called capturing the senses, and lesson 4 is bringing the world to life. Now these two is something that I like. Well, I'll put it this way: looking, and again, this is from a non-map painter skill set. Um, I'm definitely going to take this course, and I already have some ideas of what I want to create from it, and even some old paintings that I think would definitely benefit from applying this workflow to that, just to bring the original idea to life. Because especially with my um, skill level at that particular point in time when I made those, it just never brought the idea to life because I just never had the skills. Um, but then one thing I'd like to say about these last two lessons is, at least in terms of my journey, is this is where I really want to absorb more of what you've done, because the subtleties that I noticed in terms of how like the little tweaks you've put here and there just to bring this to life, to make that pop, and the decision making going in there, that's like, well, I guess no pun intended, that's super advanced. From my perspective. Um, and so if you want to just go on, speak about your insight and in terms of like your approach to the last two lessons, that'd be great to hear.
Yeah, capturing the senses. It's really about lighting, atmosphere, getting the mood down. So once you have kind of a 3D layout, I don't like to wait until the very end before um, I bring it all together.
Mm.
I like to do kind of a halfway paint over,
Yes.
and that's to make sure that we're headed in the right direction. And maybe it takes 30 minutes to just quickly big brush strokes on top of a render that doesn't have lighting in it,
Mm.
but just something to say, okay, this is getting closer to my references, closer to my idea, and I can iterate very quickly in 2D there, and then have that as kind of my blueprint to match when I go back to 3D to
Hmm.
light. Um, and then from there, lesson 4 is all in Photoshop. Uh, there is a technical aspect to how you composite a 3D image. Um, and it's very much the same setup that I had in Intro to Map Painting, and I think it's what painters have used for years of back to front painting,
Mm,
of setting up your actual Photoshop file in the right way, being able to composite the different render passes correctly to give yourself the most flexibility. Uh, and I think all of those things, if you set them up properly, it makes your job a lot easier to bring it all together and
mm.
to end up with a really great image.
And in terms of students who want to take the course, because we've already had some questions about, like should people take the first course before taking this course? And you make a point at the beginning of the course as well. Like this isn't in terms of like a beginner course in the sense of who someone has had zero experience in any map painting or um, software knowledge in terms of like Photoshop and 3D packages can maybe pick up straight away. But for someone who does say like, should they take intro to map painting first? What would you advise them?
Yeah, this was a big question in my mind when I started making this course was how do these two courses interact with each other?
Hmm.
Uh, and I purposely did not make this a sequel, like a continuation of where we left off in Intro to Map Painting.
Mm,
I mean, also it's 4 years later, so a lot's changed in 4 years, so it'd be a little hard to pick right back up. I think the courses are standalone.
mhm,
I don't think you need to have taken Intro to Map Painting before you take Advanced, and I don't necessarily think it's useful to wait to take Intro to Map Painting
mm,
before doing this one. I think it's dependent on the artists themselves and where they're at. Uh, if you didn't take Intro to Map Painting, but you're a concept artist and you're feeling comfortable in 3D right now, this might be a great course for you.
mhm,
Um, if you're really comfortable in Photoshop and you know all the tools, maybe Intro to Map Painting. I think I go really deep into a lot of specific map painting tools,
mm,
but that's really around mastering Photoshop map painting.
mhm,
And I think this one is more. This is a 3D workflow. If you didn't take Intro, you're not going to miss anything. But it is an advanced course, and you
mm,
should have some experience in 3D software, and you should know your way around Photoshop.
mm. And what would you like to see from students after taking the course?
I hope that when we see homework come in from students, uh, that I don't see a lot of similarities.
Mm,
I think that's really one of the big goals here is how to express your unique voice as an artist in the
mhm,
work that you do. So I'll be a little disheartened if I see, you know, 50 map paintings all come in that all look the same or
mm,
that look like mine. That for me would be like, damn, I didn't accomplish what I set out to do here.
mm.
Uh, but I hope that instead I see a bunch of uh, amazing paintings from people that are very unique, and that when I see them, I get a little glimpse into who the artist is.
Nice. And in terms of yourself as an artist now, who are you as an artist?
Hmm. Damn, that's a good question. Yeah, that's a really tough question. I feel like that's something that I'm still trying to figure out, to be honest.
Do you think there will ever be an answer to that?
I think there's brief moments of clarity on that one.
Mm.
They're usually fleeting. Um, I think as more and more of my time is spent as a business owner,
Mhm,
I I struggle to figure out what am I doing with my art other than um, when I have a strike of inspiration and I have no other choice but to uh, go and do a painting. It's
mm,
really like I'm thinking about this moment. I'm thinking about this painting. I can't stop thinking about this
Mm,
painting until I actually do it. And I think that's kind of where I'm at with it right now. And if I don't have that feeling, I'm not painting.
mm,
Um, so I don't really know where that leaves me as an artist, but I think maybe this is just a different chapter right now, and
mm.
maybe there will be another chapter in the future where that changes.
Yeah, I guess like everything's always, and the more we progress in life, you do tend to see those chapters. Like you can clearly define that was that chapter in my life and versus this one, compared to perhaps when you're younger. But for me personally, the way you just described like how you make art now, in terms of there's an idea that you can't get out of your head and you want to make it. Like for me, that seems like that's the holy grail of just creativity in general. Because with, and I'm sure you'd agree, like with creatives, it's more a case of there's something that you have to get out. You can't escape it, or you want to explore something. And then being able to explore it, that is perhaps where most of the frustration comes from. Is because either in terms of there's no time available, or the ability is not there, where you can't really get the idea out. That's where perhaps we do get frustrated as artists. But for me personally, um, the way you just described it, then that is something that I would like to perhaps get to a stage too, where like is it's a case of, hey, I want to make this now, I'm going to make it. And I guess maybe that's what personal art normally is supposed to appease. But yeah, I personally think that that is the holy grail of art. But in terms of art, you are also a business owner. Um, when did you? Because you've had a few businesses, right?
Yeah, yeah. I owned a VFX studio. Thanks,
How
Boutte and I started We Are Fuzzy, and now we have Kipash.
how old are you when you first started your first business?
Hmm. Um, what was that? I guess it was. I guess I was 24.
Wow. And
Yeah,
what was that
20.
experience like?
Big learning experience.
Mm,
Yeah, didn't know anything about business. It did not go well, but I got at least a taste of running a studio and what that
mm.
job entailed.
So was that you and Banks together at the beginning as well for that one?
No, no. The first one was me and another partner, but
Ah, I see.
that was a VFX studio, and Banks and I had known each other at the time, but we
Mm,
didn't reconnect and start our companies together until after my sabbatical.
mm. And actually, not sabbatical. I want to talk a bit about that. Um, how how beneficial was that sabbatical for you?
It was amazing. It was yeah, it changed the whole trajectory of my career and my life.
Wow.
I recommend it so strongly when you're at a crossroads and you maybe don't know where to go,
Mm,
or don't see the path in front of you anymore. Sometimes taking a step off the path for a little bit can show you new opportunities.
nice. And yeah, so by the way, shout out to Banks. Hello, Banks. Um, you guys founded Kitbash 3D together, and I'm familiar with the story behind it, the genesis of it. But just for anyone who is not aware, if you just want to give a quick lowdown as to how Kitbash came about.
Yeah, we both kind of were at a crossroads in our careers. Banks was a producer in the film industry for a decade. We had known each other for almost a decade, and we kind of both found ourselves at the same moment, trying to figure out what to do next.
Mm,
Um, and we both saw the future headed in the same direction. We saw that digital distribution was changing. We saw marketing was changing, that brands were starting to become production companies
mm,
to market their own products, and just this massive change in everything that we had been working in.
mm,
Um, so we also had the same philosophy of we worked for a lot of places that we didn't like working for. We felt like we weren't appreciated, and we
mm,
didn't necessarily agree with the principles or the cultures of the companies we had worked for. Uh, and so I think within a day of just talking through all of this stuff, we decided to start a company together. And we were like, we don't even know what we're going to do. We know we see the world going in the same direction. And I had been working on a video game on my free time, and I was like, well, I'm about to take this out to publishers. Maybe we could just start a publishing company and do that. Uh, so we did. That's We Are Fuzzy, and we put out the game a year and a half later with Nintendo called Sleep Tight. But in that time, we got everything ready. We were headed to E3. We had our game launch window, and we were going to release that September. We walked through the doors, and uh, there's an announcement that Nintendo is releasing a Mario game and a Pokemon game, on either week surrounding our launch. And so we were like, we're going to get crushed here. Let's delay the game and let's figure out something else to do. And so we went to a coffee shop across the street, and I was like, well, I've had this idea for these 3D assets. Like, I'm struggling to find assets that all have a single style. Sometimes I pull an asset down and it's good quality. Sometimes it's bad. It's always like rolling the dice. What if we just built a VFX studio pipeline to build the same types of assets that we were building in the studios that I worked for, but we made them available to everyone? Uh, and so that was kind of where the spark came, and we started racing towards that. And 100 days later, we launched Kit Bash.
Wow.
And then, really the goal was, can we sell enough kits to build another one? And that was really the goal for a long time. It's just like, can we sell enough of these so that we can build one more? And I wanted to release a kit every month, just a new world, new kit. And yeah, that's kind of how it started. And then the journey since then has just been a wild roller coaster.
Yeah, like I remember because at that point in time, I believe on the Learn Square, this is before I started working for Learn Square, they had the Twitch streams, and you were doing, I think, weekly ones. I believe it was on Monday you did yours, or Tuesday, one of those 2 days. And then a few weeks in, you mentioned, I don't know if you teased Kit Bash really, you mentioned what it would be. And then the following week, it was out. And I remember quite vividly looking at it. Like, when I first saw what it was, my eyes like lit up. It was almost like I've never taken drugs before, but I guess what a hit is like. But in terms of what it was, what I saw was an opportunity to um play with things. And I mentioned this before, like it would have taken me quite a while to set up myself just to even play with, in terms of like, and what I mean by play is like making my own stories. I tend to do a lot of vehicles, so I was putting them in situations where I believe they exist in. And um the one that I got was the first one that I bought was Neo Tokyo. And I remember at that point in time, it was it, the value of it. I believe it's $200 they launch for, right? Or like the full price of a kit.
Yep.
So I remember looking at it thinking, this is a big chunk of like what I have spare after, my salary comes out and what have you. So it was a bit of hesitation thinking, like what if this isn't going to be useful for me? It's a bit of an outlay, but I still did it, and I'm glad I did, and I haven't looked back since. Because for me, like, it has empowered the way I create, in terms of like, just certain workflows. And I'm very experimental in my approach. And sometimes that's a bad thing because you spend too much time experimenting. But then when you have something that does saves you a lot of that time, and in a way where you can easily re-experiment when an experiment doesn't work, it's just been super, super useful in that regard. So yeah, man, like, and then obviously after that, seeing how Kit Bash has just become an industry standard that it has now, in terms of a creative who always wants a solid tool, that's been great to see. It almost like I feel like proud of it, like almost like I've created it. And then on the other hand, just in terms of my personal journey, along with Kitbash 3D, because you guys have, it's fair to say, been very good to me in terms of like when you guys used to showcase my work, and then the Kitmas Bash, and like the KB 3D contests and what have you. Like I will never forget those moments. I'll never forget those the like I guess the love and appreciation that was coming from your guys, from your end in that regard. Um, like I'll always carry that with me in terms of for the rest of my career. But then even fellow creatives, fellow students who have also gone on similar ways in terms of you've seen them how they use the kits and just create amazing epic projects, and then their career skyrockets as well. So in that regard, I also super appreciate it because on one hand, and so this is becoming a bit of a monologue, but on one hand, it's great to see this product that is servicing the industry, but then on the other hand, which is what, if I had to choose between the two, is probably what I'm drawn to the most, is how it really empowers creatives, and it's done so in a genuine way. So firstly, congrats on that. And secondly, why is it important for Kitbash 3D to want to empower artists? Because it's clear that that is something that you guys do and are very successful at.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Aaron. It's I'm very touched that that's your impression with Kitbash, and I'm glad you feel ownership over this too, because you did help build Kitbash since the very beginning on our Twitch channels and creating stuff with it, and being an early adopter, and being like a really early and important part of our community. Um, and I think that when we started there weren't that many people using it, but there were artists like yourself who were using it, who were creating amazing artwork with it and sharing it constantly and helping other people who were just getting started with it. And I wish I could take credit for this, but I can't. It was that community that you and a couple other people fostered around this that was so positive and vibrant. Um, that really helped us get really clear on what we were doing here, and helped us realize that we weren't making assets. That was not the mission of Kitbash. That our mission was to enable and inspire artists. And that was a powerful calling and a mission that Banks and I, and now everyone on the Kitbash team, I think really connected to, and realized that like this was worthy of us putting everything towards this. It was worth it to, for me personally, not be doing map paintings anymore, and kind of leave that professional career to go full in on how do I accomplish this mission of enabling, inspiring artists. And I'm only one piece of this puzzle, and the Kitbash team is all kind of connected through that. And so, right now it might be models. We have a lot of ambitions beyond that to continue to do that specific thing, enabling, inspiring artists. And I think that's worth doing, and I think that's worth existing. Is Learn Squared does that in so many ways as well, of training artists, but also fostering a positive community here. I think Kitbash does it in our own way, and I think more and more companies contributing here and helping to grow this group of people creating digital art or digital worlds. I think there's something really inspiring about that. To create something from nothing, to build something immersive, and hopefully one day to build virtual worlds in the sense of, where are we going to spend our time every day? And if we look at the super high level, it's, we spend all day in a virtual world anyways. It's just called Instagram or Facebook, and it's just not that inspiring. And I think that, this is the community that can build a way more inspiring version of that, with the video games they build, with the films they build, but hopefully with the more interactive things and hardware and software and all the other things that we have no clue that's going to come out, but we know
Mm,
that this is the community that's going to design it and make it something wonderful.
mm. And one thing, and again, this is just more like as an individual point of view. Um, One thing that I like about it as well, and the approach that you guys take, is that it's it's accessible because it shows, like, if people really want to study it, like, you can always look at certain companies and just certain brands and what have you. And a lot of the times they can maybe be faceless because you associate everything with a brand, but you don't know really who's behind it, what their philosophies are, and what have you. And a lot of the time it's just about, like, I guess, the business side of things, making money and just growing exponentially. Um, but one thing about artists and creatives is that we maybe do get a bit obsessive, and there's always, like, we would like digging around in terms of references for our projects, and also um to finding out what people and companies are about, especially the ones that you like. And Kit Bash have been very open about that. And in terms of yourself and Banks and your journeys as professionals, you guys have been open about that as well. And the openness does come across as genuine. And I believe he has. And I've met you in person as well. I've had private conversations with you, and I can attest to that. That's how I came across in terms of, so that's how you came across to me that way as well. Um, but then it's also because you're creative as well. So someone like myself can relate to that because you've been through the same kind of like trials and tribulations, and the same kind of pitfalls. But then it also shows that, in terms of as a role model, that someone like myself can build something like this. So it's almost like, and not to discredit in terms of what you have achieved, but also shows that, like, anybody can make something that they want to make as well. And the fact that, like, you said with the how it came about was as kind of a reaction to, the original game that was supposed to be, I guess, the initial project you wanted to release first, and this was a reaction to that. And look where it's gone. And this was only because of, the determination and the willingness to want to make it as well. um in terms of, for, I guess, a generation of artists that are around now, it's almost like showing everyone the blueprint of, this is how you can create your own ideas, and, to excuse the pun, create your own worlds as well, because there's other people that might have other ideas for different kind of maybe solutions that they see, that all it takes is basically have the right attitude, have the right mission, and essentially never give up, and you can make something amazing as well. But then at the same time, it's not I'm not saying companies do this, but there's always that, like, some companies, or maybe the business world as such, there has the connotation of, it exploits its customers. Um, and with, like, places like, Kit Bash, for example, it's the complete opposite. It empowers their customers even more so. And modern companies, I personally think, should be like that. And that's what makes me want to engage with that brand even more as well. So, my point I want to get at is that something that was strategic on your end, or is that just something purely based on how you guys felt towards the community?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a negative connotation to business,
Mm,
right? And marketing has like a very negative connotation. Uh, I think that's one of the things that drew Banks and I to this, was that we thought we could do it differently. Uh, and I think we have done it differently in good and bad ways. And we've definitely made a lot of mistakes along the way, and
mm,
we're learning from those constantly. But I think, Banks's brilliant insight to marketing was that, marketing is not supposed to be about selling someone
mm,
something. It's about connecting people, and connecting people to a brand, and connecting people to a mission, and connecting people who all believe the same thing.
mhm,
Uh, and I think that's been our approach to marketing, is is really, with that idea in mind of like, we're not selling kit bash to someone that we don't think it could help.
Mhm.
Actually, I don't even, when I think about selling kit bash, I think more of how do we create value for someone.
Mm.
And these were tools that were really valuable for me to create. Maybe they're valuable for someone else.
Mm.
And maybe they're not. And maybe, if you're an amazing 2D artist and you're using awesome tools like Procreate, then like this isn't for you. It doesn't mean we can't support you, because at the end of the day, you're still a creative person
Mhm.
who still aligns with the philosophies that we have. So I think when we talk about was this deliberate, it was and it wasn't. Like, we learned a lot as we went, but I think we deliberately tried to approach business differently.
Mm.
And we thought, business could be a positive thing. Business could be a way for us to connect people together, to work with great people, to create an inspiring environment for artists to work.
Mhm.
And I think that's a whole other thing, is we're enabling inspiring artists. It has to start with our company
Mm.
and the people who work here. And if it's not there, then it's not going to be out in the world. And so I think those were the things that were deliberate of, we want to make a positive impact here.
Mhm.
And and we want to be true to ourselves. And we're going to dedicate so far almost 5 years of our lives to this thing, and looking like another many years, hopefully, that we get to dedicate to this thing. Let's do something that we believe in and that matters to us.
Well, I think you guys have nailed it. And even that same philosophy, like to tie it into the course as well, I believe it's the same kind of philosophy, that the DNA of that particular course is throughout that as well. Because, like you mentioned, it's about when you see people's work, you want it to be almost a reflection of themselves. And I believe what you guys do with Kit Bash as well is the same, because even flashback to the Kitmas Bash that happened way back then. We all had the same kit to play with, but no one did the same piece for that particular, that short time that we had. But yeah, no, I think that's a great way to wrap up the podcast as well. Max, always grateful, and thanks so much for coming on, and thanks a lot for your insights.
Aaron, thank you so much for having me, and it's amazing to get to talk with you.
A big thanks to Max for joining me for today's episode. Advanced Matte Painting is out now. Sign up today to create better worlds, and you'll get a free Kit Bash 3D kit to help you along the way. And if you want to expand your matte painting horizons even further, then check out our matte painting bundle, which include Max's other Learn Squared course, Intro to Matte Painting, and 3D matte painting with the epic Stephen Corman. Till next time.